Lots of fun. Coming up, this is a really great conversation with Zack Brigman. I'm excited because it was a chance to really dive into one of the most foundational things that I've been really digging in with a lot of different founders and product managers and product marketers. How do we figure out what is the right way to describe the problem and then build the right method? Using that method, we then understand how to solve the problem, and then we get on to doing what really matters. Zack is a really, really fantastic human. Spent a great time together with him on the podcast. Literally could have gone on for hours and hours after that. He's just somebody who has a lot to offer. And we did a great job of really talking about one of the sort of challenges around data lifecycle and data protection, but it goes into some amazing directions: product marketing, product management, product enjoyment, and most importantly, doing what matters. So this is Zack Brigman from Metallic, a Commvault company, on the DiscoPosse podcast. Oh, wait, sorry, one more thing. Don't forget, if you can, smash that like button and hit the subscribe, and then don't forget to hit the bell icon, and so that we show up right in your feed. All right, let's get to the show. We know how this goes. We're recording. We're just going to start.
Perfect.
So I am really happy when you plan something and then we get to start it. It's kind of cool. I don't often do the meet before we podcast, but this was cool, Zack. We did meet beforehand briefly, and it took me about 32 seconds to realize that this is going to be an amazing conversation, because as soon as we chatted, it was yeah, I'm not gonna have to work hard here. This is gonna be a blast. We got a lot of neat stuff to talk about, both kind of industry stuff, what you and the team are doing through work, but also just how you got to there, and there's a lot of fun stuff we're gonna talk about. So I'm lucky enough that I spent a little time with you already, Zack. But for people that are brand new to you, if you don't mind, let's give you an intro and what you're doing. What exactly do you do here, as the old Office Space meme goes?
Sure. No, I appreciate it. And first and foremost, thanks for having me. I really look forward to our session today. But my name is Zack Brigman. I'm a senior product marketer here at Metallic. Metallic is part of Commvault, so in the data protection space as it relates to my current role. But spent the last decade plus in the tech space, as well as a brief detour in the chemical industry, but everything from .NET software to field service software, talent acquisition, data protection, as well as some really highly specialized chemicals. Been doing product marketing for the last decade or so. So I've seen a lot of exciting things, right? And I know we're going to be talking about everything around data, but have really had a great chance to see a lot of different technologies over the years, and really fortunate for that.
You opened a can of worms that I'm gonna try not to start with the chemical route, but that it is always interesting that in technology, product management, product marketing, it's a very surprisingly creative function, and personalities that are drawn towards it tend to be creative. They tend to also be musicians, photographers, hikers. There's the what else do you do question is even more fun. And then when you go into background, you find out some of the detours we take in our careers are really fascinating. And it may seem like a detour, but in the end it's actually it totally makes sense. You just explored that part of your personality and your goal set, and it's and we all kind of end up back doing this thing. People just think that we're project managers or we're nerds, you know, but to be sort of customer facing, field facing, community facing, but yet be a technologist, it's a very unique narrow set of folks that are able to do that. I was a bit surprised by it early on, and then I was oh wow, this is sort of a super. I'm blessed because I'm surrounded by fantastic folks like yourself, and so I guess get I'm among my people.
Yeah, no,
Like,
100%, right? It's not a linear path, right? We have many detours, as you mentioned, right? And it takes you in industry to different places, right? Out of industry to different places. You realize what you like and what you don't, right? And it kind of molds where you end up. But the experiences along the way across, whether it's tech, whether it's a different industry, right? They give you different perspectives. And that's what makes people a little more well-rounded sometimes when you hear these, what is this person doing in this role with this company? And then you hear their background, their skill set, and it's like they're the perfect match, right? Because they have these
yeah.
worldly experiences sometimes that you wouldn't pair together naturally, but the output's amazing. So I think it's always interesting to see how people get where they're going. And yeah, there's no one path, right?
And what's interesting too is that you find over time that the person transcends the email
Yes.
domain, right? Like, and
Yep.
it's especially in the startup and tech ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
there became a thing where we were, at least I'm an older gentleman, so I came into the point where people were like, I got my first tech contract when I was 25, so it was
Sure.
25 years ago,
Sure.
and it worked for Sun Life Financial, and
Yeah.
my recruiter, I got this short-term contract, and he's like, "Hey, it's been great being your recruiter, but that's it, you're good."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, they're going to renew, and then they'll renew again, and then they'll, maybe they'll probably bring you on full time, and that's it. Like it could be a life career." And I was like, "Really?"
Yeah.
Like, wow.
I don't know
Like,
if I signed up for that.
right. Like I remembered signing up for, I wanted he says I wanted a 3 month, because I was brand new. I had no experience. I had no
Sure.
university. I had a high school education. I was
Yep.
like, I had the technology knowledge because I'd been doing like database programming. And my dad was a techie. So I
Sure.
did like database stuff when I was 15. I was learning programming, but not formally, just like mucking around with it. And then here I am later on, and I'd done a bunch of diverting of my career
Sure.
into retail and shoe repair and all sorts of weird stuff. But then I got back into tech, and I like studied like crazy, took a bunch of certifications so that I could sort of pad the resume a bit. And then when I got in here, I was like, I've got to like go jump, jump, jump. That was my goal. It's like, I'm going to like every one I can get 20% better, 20% better.
Sure.
Like I got to be short term.
Sure.
And so originally it's like, okay, we got you a 6 month contract. And I was like, oh, I was kind of hoping it was going to be three, but I didn't say that to the guy,
You're
the
tying
poor
me
fella.
down.
I said, hey, the duration isn't quite what I was after. And he goes, oh, okay, well, let me see what I can do. And then he phones me back an hour later. He goes, good news is I got you a year. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like I
Going
wanted
the
the other way. I
opposite.
wanted a
Going the wrong
short-term
way.
contract.
Yeah.
But they re-upped along the way, and they did take good care of me, and it did work out well. But it was funny at the time. I thought, oof, this career thing just didn't seem like I didn't want to start a career. I wanted to start a path towards a career,
Yep.
and so it was. But yeah, so like I said, that there's a lot. Those detours became meaningful in hindsight, which was kind of funny.
And it reminds me, right? Because so someone who I have a deep admiration for, that I worked alongside a manager at, an executive at my old company. I'll say, you look at his resume, right, and you try to connect the dots, and you say, this doesn't look like any progression down a career path, right? Went to university for education, becomes a specialist in pest control, does a detour as landscaping, learns coding along the side, runs product management. But part of the reason why he was so successful is all those little things along the way that helped build him. So you're right. Like sometimes 1 plus 1 doesn't equal always two, but somehow we're all a sum of our parts, right? And it's
Yeah.
nice because I think that's part of what makes tech so interesting, because you do have people who, don't get me wrong, brilliant minds go into it, and that's their focus. But then you have folks who start elsewhere, whether it be financial or otherwise, right? That get pulled into the tech industry and can glean from other industries and other experiences, and that's largely why tech is where it is today. Not just because it's about the technology, but it's also because it's become this broader umbrella that encompasses so many other capacities, right?
Yeah. And it becomes a thing of like, so he's an educator,
Yeah,
then got into pest control. So like relating a problem to people that they
sure.
experience. Like, so in the end, what he becomes is a human interaction specialist. And
Yes.
that, remember when I was, when I should have been going to university, it was the dawn of what they called HCI. Before it was
Yeah.
hyperconverged infrastructure, it was human computer interaction. And the idea of like, how do we make better interfaces?
Mhm.
And it became a path towards behavioral psychology being integrated.
Yes.
And so they were taking people from psychology degrees and moving them into this human computer
100%.
interaction. And the good side of it is, which we learned a lot. The bad side of it is we got Facebook and TikTok out of it. But
It's a perfect example. It really is, right? How many times did you hear UI, UI, UI? It's a pretty UI. But it wasn't until you had the inflection point of UX where it became this different capacity. Now you see this wave of people come in from designers, creative folks, psychologists, right? All of the things around how we use, not just what we use, right? And that was kind of an inflection point with software. It was like, hey, it doesn't just need to look pretty, it needs to be usable. What makes it usable, right? So there are those inflection points that really change the course of, product and how things are developed at, a very molecular level, right? And sometimes it takes outside perspective to do that. So I think that's a fantastic point around how, like, you think the light bulb goes off and we could think about things differently, and we need to source talent that isn't here, right? And it's not because it's a lack of sight. It's because, hey, we need to go to where these people are.
yeah, when even you look on the other side of the business, like on the revenue generating side, like the
Yep.
sales folks, great enterprise sales, professional, she or he is likely to have sold many things over time. So they come in and, we're like the nerds who like, we deeply understand the product and the problem
Yep.
it solves. And like that we dive into like how it works, and we're
Sure.
excited about the idea. We know the ports that it communicates on, and
Yes.
this, like we under all this stuff that's like down in the weeds, the speeds and feeds.
Yep. Yep.
And they come along and like they used to sell, insurance, and now they're selling enterprise software
Yeah.
to, and you're like, at first I was like, I don't get how you can be so successful. I'm like, oh no, you understand how to map outcomes
Hmm.
and use really good relationship management to help guide people towards understanding that they have a problem.
Yep.
They understand the problem exists. They understand they have the problem. They understand that we have a solution which helps them to solve this problem. They understand there's a value attached to solving this problem, and that it is an ROI that is greater than the price of this product that we're about to experience with them. And that's it.
So
Take
it's
all
not
the
binary.
Yeah, take all the stuff out of it, whether it's pest
Yeah.
control, whether it's guitars, whether it's bicycles.
Yep.
It's what's the outcome you're looking to reach? How do we get you towards there? And I happen to have a solution that's differentiated from others that meets your
Yes.
required capabilities. Like
Yes.
now you're like, oh dang, it's all bloody psychology.
You're right. But it takes folks, right? Engineering's going to look at it one way. You're going to have marketing look at it another way. You're going to have people who
Yeah.
are selling it look at it a different way. And it's you're 100% right. Like when you get in those silos, everyone looks at things a little differently. And if you could break those down, then you kind of get a more well-rounded appreciation or approach to something. But engineering, right? It's always going to be binary. I built this. I'm super. Let me tell you about why it's great, right? And there's going to be someone across the aisle saying, "Well, tell me what it does." Not just
Right.
me.
Yeah,
So
and that's what's we're in a unique spot where we get to appreciate both sides. Like
yes.
you sort of get to be the proxy between those things, and
Yep.
that's why working in product management, product
Hmm.
marketing, these areas is it's such a I love it because you can be this like you have to have a deep understanding of every angle
Yes.
and to have the engineer appreciate the engineering. Like I said, I've machine learning like Chat GPT
Hmm.
is being written by somebody who probably couldn't pass a Turing test. Like
Sure.
somebody is going to be so deep into the technology that creates this machine learning capability, and they're so focused like singularly almost to the level where somebody would be like, he's a bit of an odd cat, that person, right?
Yes.
Like, but that's their superpower, and we
Sure.
embrace it. And then how do I work with that person to empower them,
Correct.
and then relate what the person that's going to consume this product, how do I like create this
Yes.
proxy between those two things and then bring them together where like in product you're like, I represent the customer, but I also represent engineering because those two people need to talk and they don't speak the same language.
Sure. Sure. No, and you couldn't have said it any better. And I'll give you an AI example. Someone very early on in my career, when I stepped into product marketing, it was a new capacity, right? Every company did it differently. Some were focused on solutions. Some were focused on, like, for instance, getting very deep in the technical details. It was amoebic. It looked different from every organization. Someone early on in my career said, you live in between worlds, right? Engineering is going to tell you how the clock's made, and sales is going to tell you what the time is, right? They're both talking the same thing, but there's an element in between. To give you that AI example, right? We're going to program AI and there's going to be an output. In the middle there's a whole lot of secret sauce that needs to be told, needs to be verified, all of that, right? Is it accountable, right? Where we have these machines running, can we explain it, right? So there's a whole ethical element as well. So there, when you look at AI, it's the prime example, because you have the machine and you have the output, and that area in between is kind of this black box. And if you don't have the capacity to be able to unpack the black box, then it needs to be something that needs to be explained. Product marketing, whatever it is, right? That's the focus. It's not just what we're building or what the output is, but it's also that complete path of end to end. It's like from inception to delivery, what does that look like, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
And I think that's actually a kind of a perfect, move into what's important about machine learning and AI and these certain new technologies, as sometimes as frightening as they are when we talk about it. There, for the longest time, we had this idea that it's going to replace a human function, but it doesn't. We've recognized that it's augmenting and helping to maybe codify a human thing, a behavior, some kind of So how do we take not just like raw like scripting functions, which was the first part of automation, was about like, I do a thing, it's a run book. So how do I semantically represent a run book? And, it's whether it's whatever your language of choice is, or your automation, scripting language of choice, that framework is meant to, codify as a semantic representation of a set of steps so that it can be repeatable, consistency of outcome. That's kind of what the goal was. But then we go one step further. Like, we've worried about that, but then we love automation. We realize it's actually kind of cool, because the stuff that can't be automated, then we can spend more time and human effort where it needs to be spent. And then we go one step further, and then people are like, but what happens when you get machine learning and it's starting to do behavior and heuristic analysis of things?
Yes.
Like data movement, traffic movement, network interactions. And like, first of all, we went through the learning phases, which we've been doing for a long time, which nobody realized. All this data that we've been collecting for monitoring and such allowed us to create models to help, and then pairing it with people that do the thing and saying, like, we've got a system that sees this particular pattern occurring, and we believe that means this. Is this correct? And then being able to then listen to that person doing the thing, and then say, oh, okay, yeah, this is correct. Oh, it's a red herring. Like that. No, that's an expected behavior, but it's very noisy. And so let's kind of go right to the very start. What is Metallic? And that's why I love this, because it's like, I've dug into the platform. I got to see your folks at Tech Field Day, Cloud Field Day, or not too long ago. But that's why it's just beautiful segue into kind of how this stuff matters.
All things data. Yeah, no, Metallic is it's the SaaS delivered portfolio from Commvault. So if people know who Commvault is, a large data protection player in the space, 2.5 decades plus. Metallic is our SaaS delivered data protection branch, right? So taking all that goodness of on-prem installed software and delivering it in this lightweight model, and it really spans the data estate. So if you're looking for cloud, if you're looking for on-prem SaaS, we provide the capabilities to be able to efficiently protect, recover your data, keep it compliant, and we do it in the cloud. So when you think Metallic, it really is that SaaS branch of Commvault, and been in the market for about 3 years or so now. So I've seen a lot of growth, a lot of traction. It's something that I think is really meeting the needs as customers are looking to say, how do I protect my data, given not only just this backdrop of cyber threats, but to keep it compliant from things that potentially may be outside our control.
Yeah, and this is what excited me about it, because I'm a product marketer at heart, and I
Mhm.
like to dig deeper. It's like I would say, like there's the way you describe what it is that you go to market with today,
Yes.
but then what I like to do is like kind of go try and see beyond it of like, based on how you've described this, what is the system doing? And
Sure.
then what is the potential in future for what that system can do? And that's what really excited me about what it is that your team is doing, in that you're taking something that is sort of a mundane, seemingly mundane thing. You're like, yay.
Yeah.
We called it, we went to the data protection,
Sure.
description, which was, people are like, you mean backups? Like, well, I don't mean backups. I mean like
Yeah.
recovery, because actually
Yes.
recovery is the only important part. You can back up all you want if you can't recover it in a meaningful way, in a useful way. So
Yep.
then we learned about like stateful backups and
Yes.
application, state aware backups. Then we got better, and then we got, it was all about how do you do data lifecycle management.
Yes.
And like, okay, cool. Now we're getting further. And then it was like, oh no, how do we do like sandbox temporary
Sure.
recovery where you, and like, okay, that's neat, that's pretty cool. I'm like, oh, but now that you can do that, what can you do with it? And like, oh, now you could effectively have like multi-stage, multi-environment, like DevOps style of,
Yes.
you could take a
Yeah.
system and you
Test.
could
Yes.
like, I'm like, we thought we were just backing up and stuff, now we're doing fantastic things.
Yeah, and no, it's interesting, right? Because and I think you hit kind of a really, it's a nerve, right? When it's like you look at backup and recovery, right? And it's a very narrow scope, and that may be what it was a couple of decades ago, where the folks administering the solutions, the folks focused on it, we need to back up and recover, right? Data protection, right? The backup and recovery has really evolved to be something much broader. Yes, the function is backing up, the function is recovery. You hit the nail on the head. Nothing is sexy about protecting data until it's time to recover, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the interesting thing, right, is when you take a look at like these macro trends, you look at what's going on with cyber, you look at the pandemic and how that shaped things, digital transformation with going to the cloud, as you mentioned, development, right? People moving to containers. It's really become something that's broader than just this. I don't want to call it a mundane task, but it has been billed in some organizations' eyes in terms of saying like, we need this for a rudimentary backup and recovery, right? It really has evolved into the kind of a backbone and a foundation and a kind of a stronghold of how I do my business from a technology standpoint, and making sure that as we evolve, as we flex, as we have new challenges, I'm able to stay secure along the way. And it's just been kind of one cog and one really important thing in the wheel that I think has become expanded. But at the same point in time, there are some pockets where, although it has a broader impact on the business, right, data protection is still kind of myopically put in this box, which has been a little bit interesting to see how things have evolved. So the definition at times and what it does don't always match, but I think that that's slowly changing.
Yeah, we still, if you, I mean, I've been around very early days
Mhm.
of tech and this evolution from like mainframe to distributed systems. And it was funny, like, so when I think of backup, I'm still old school. I literally think of some guy with a short sleeved, dress shirt and a wide tie
Yes,
shoving a tape into a
sure.
machine. And then we got robotic, tape changers. And you're like, this is wizardry.
Yeah.
And but in the end, it was like slow to back up, slow to recover. We started to exceed the backup windows. Then we got
Yes.
LTO2, LTO3. So tape evolved. And at some point, we said, well, tape's going away. We're going to go to, digital backup. And I used, we actually backed up to a mainframe system. So I won't say the name of the system, not hard to guess where we're going. But like there were a few different platforms that sort of tried this idea of like, can we recover to a digital media
Yep.
and then secondary recovery to tape, so that
Yep.
we've got an intermediary place. And then we got even further where it's like primary and secondary are digital,
Mhm.
and now it's offsite. And then you got to, what do you do with that data? And that Commvault, I remembered way early on, they had the idea of like, what can you do now that this data is in this immutable
Yes.
state, that you can
Mhm.
search it? And they got into the compliance and like information compliance and like email. You could like search offline immutable
Yes.
emails, and like really neat stuff around that compliance governance side
Sure.
of data management and data, you know, whatever, data compliance, I guess you'd say. But then now we got into that same technology to understand the method of creating immutable copies of data so that you could perform other business functions. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, you could take an immutable copy of a database and you could fire it to 7 different locations and be ready for instant recovery.
Sure.
Like, so that the methodology had to be there first.
Yeah,
And that was the piece.
it did, right? And I think that you're 100% right. And speaking about evolution, right, with humble beginnings, you look at things like Sarbanes-Oxley, where it was like focused on a specific compliance scenario, right? And you have things like worm storage, you have things like immutability, as you mentioned, right? It's kind of a moment where you say, okay, this is a use case for technology in this specific area. When you look at immutability today, not that that still isn't the use case, right? But it's more around, is it tamper-proof from cyber events, right? So you look at how things have evolved, just like the tape analogy that you had with, how things are administered, but also what things are used for, right? And I think that you're 100% right in the fact that it has evolved in a way that has supported multiple use cases. Is it used for e-discovery purposes? Is it used for, to your point, right? It could be a business continuity scenario, which many customers really lean into data protection for. The use cases and the fringe use cases are not all created equal, but it's something that really encompasses this broad set of potential solution areas that data protection can deliver, right?
Then the interesting thing again, like, so the methodology being important, so that's why like Metallic as a standalone platform and solution set, like the problem set you were chasing was around like, can we do this through SaaS delivery? And like it was neat to see that begin. And then of course the acquisition by Commvault was a pretty good, well, it was, to me, was an obvious pairing. The challenge is like which side will come out as the, like I said, the guy in the Matrix when he like shoves his finger in his chest and like one of them is going to take over the other. This unfortunately in acquisitions, quite often you can get lost in the shuffle that they'll take a lot of the IP, the sort of that methodology, and they'll bake it into something, but lose sight of the vision, the founding team jets, like all this stuff occurs. But I can see the progression as far as like the organizational progression seemed really good, and the technology integration seems like the larger company was like, these kids know what they're doing. We need to learn from them, and they need to learn from us, and we can learn together. It was like this beautiful playground of like, we got new toys. Let's do this all and let's have fun.
So a little known fact, right? So Metallic itself is an incubation project from Commvault. So there wasn't actually any acquisition.
Oh wow! So this is like
very interesting, and that's what makes it interesting. We joke because we say like this: one day someone's going to study what was done here, because it really was remarkable.
It was actually just a spin out from nothing and then a spin in back into the org kind of thing.
Yeah, you know what the funny part was? It was like Commvault is a leader in the space, right? You can look at the Gartner report, so on and so forth, right? It has been foundational in this industry. And we've realized the appetite for SaaS. We realized that folks grow to the cloud. You have things like transformation going on. There's other ways that we can deliver this, right? So what Commvault really did was took the product, right, put it in its incubation, and essentially set it off to the side and said, go ahead and do your thing. And we ran it as a separate business for a period of time in terms of really making sure that we were able to take that IP, that goodness that Commvault had, and refactor the form factor. So now that we look, across the landscape, when customers come to Commvault and businesses take a look at Commvault, really we've been able to harness that IP and deliver it in this new model. But we present customers with the flexibility to say, hey, if I need it as SaaS, if I need it as installed, if I need it as a managed service, I can go ahead and consume it. But it's not done without that Commvault IP, whether that be protecting things like databases or cloud or SaaS apps. That really is the engine that makes it go. But what was really interesting was the way Commvault approached it and said, let's put it off to the side. Let's really rethink things and make sure we do it right. And that's what you're seeing in terms of the product today, as how it's kind of hit this inflection point in terms of really being able to meet customers' needs.
Yeah, and because it is, I mean, my last my startup that I was at got acquired by a large organization, and was able to stay prominent through and beyond the acquisition. but it's so it is a rarity too, even in those, like, to have a company to see that those incubation style, like, let's create a startup within, give them sort of autonomy,
Yes.
give them freedom to do their own R&D, trust them to the outcome. You kind of just like, okay, I'm going to give you a
Sure.
budget, and you're going to run it like a company. But
I'm going to
so
close
that,
my eyes and pretend I didn't do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But there's a couple of organizations I know are doing that style now, where they said, like, we're actually funding
Yeah.
internal startups to the point where they're like, you are starting your own incorporation and everything,
Yes.
and then they're like, and if it goes well, we're gonna acquire you. Like, we're basically, we own you
Yes.
because we're funding you, and
Yes.
ideally we just basically, but so it gives the best of both worlds, where you give them
Yes.
the freedom to act with autonomy like a standalone startup. They have the opportunity to fail, but there's also a potential to have a good outcome, and so they're incented to do it, versus like, hey, Zach, we're going to put you on a project. We want you
Yeah.
to see how,
Yeah.
could we do something in SaaS? And
Yeah.
you'd grab the engineers and they'd be like, no, people like installed
Yeah.
software, like, and it's like, like, just imagine for a moment we needed to start from scratch, like
Yeah.
first principles. Like, can we?
Yes.
It's hard to get the freedom to do that.
100%. And I think there's other pressures outside of just your appetite from a technology standpoint, right? If everyone closes their eyes and you think about whatever product it is, and that next wave, right? If it was just a matter of going like this and having all the funding, having all those things and being done, everybody would do it, right? Am I private or am I public, right? Do I have to answer to shareholders? Do I not? Are we on VC money? Are we, like, there's so many things around getting a project like this off the ground that have macro influences that are outside of just your appetite to deliver a great product. So I think you're right when you say that the companies that have been really able to disrupt themselves, it takes that buy-in at a leadership level of saying, like, we need to relinquish some control here, but at the same point in time have some core tenets that we stand to. So there's a lot of things in there that make it the secret sauce move, but it really is a dedication to making sure that, one, we're aligned on delivering it, and two, we have the backbone to be able to support it. So it's
Yeah.
very interesting times. We've learned a lot, but it's something that has been pretty exciting.
I think these will be sort of the next wave of case studies too, as we see more
Mhm.
successes like this. You think of like Eric Ries and the startup way, and this idea of the lean startup methodology, and so like they had the first book of course was Lean Startup, and
Sure.
then the startup way was a follow on to it, which one of the things I loved, I think, was even in the introduction, just says like the biggest problem that people are having is that they come from big companies, then they go to a startup, and then within 18 months they're trying to build a big company. And you're like, that's not why you did this. Like,
Sure.
so they're effectively repeating the same mistake. So to have the ability to forget the big machine and this is how we've
Yeah.
always done it, and then successfully bring that in and move the rest of the culture of the firm
Yeah.
to embrace this newness. It's cool. This is where the startup way meets built to last.
Yeah. It's a tightrope, right? Like there is both worlds colliding, right? And as both worlds collide, right, there's challenge with challenges with startup, and there's the freedom with startup. Just
Yeah.
like there's challenges with an established business, as there is benefits of an established business, and if the pendulum swings in one way or the other, it doesn't work, right? You need to find that happy medium of the support and the foundation. Commvault's lucky because we have really solid IP that we're able to build upon, but also needed to have that ability to say, okay, we need to allow ourselves to be disrupted by ourselves, right? But at the same point in time, have these governing principles where it's not the Wild West.
Yeah.
The challenge that you have with some startup mentality is just the fact that everything's nimble, everything's loose, right? And sometimes that can be a detriment, and vice versa. When you get on the other side, and you're kind of a well-established company, you may lose your scrappiness, you may lose your ability to be nimble. So it's like, how do you not lose your identity, but make sure that the best of both of those principles don't cannibalize one another? So it's super interesting. And the one thing that I would say during my time here, I said I've been here for about 3 years, which is the inception of Metallic. The one thing that has been really interesting is as you go through these development processes, as you see things develop, and as you see how things really manifest over time, you start to realize, even in your own maturation, right? You start to realize things that you had set out to do day one have really evolved organically, and you're right where you need to be. And that's kind of, it's a beautiful thing when it happens, but a lot of times there's learning curves and there's hiccups along the way and stuff that you need to try to navigate. But it's been a pretty good experience in terms of just seeing how that startup culture can evolve.
Yeah, it is the ideal scenario, but it is almost sort of this unicorn-esque type of like uniqueness that's really difficult. It sounds, what was the old saying? Everything in theory, everything works in practice, but in practice it doesn't. So I think it's the Albert Einstein quote, right? And the ability to I think the startup, the 0 to 1 sort of crowd, they call it, a thing exists that is a foundation, but what's missing is like, what can you do for that foundation now? And I think the phrase used called selling pickaxes to coal miners. Like you can't sell them coal mines anymore. That's established. That's already, it's a done deal. But what can we do? What's the next thing that's a market within that market? And that's to be able to embrace that without just literally having people leave and say, like, I'm going to do this on my own. And successfully reintegrate that. It's
and the interesting thing to, like you mentioned all those things, like we've purely talked about how businesses come together, right? How you mold it within the walls of your own organization, but it's amongst the backdrop, of a 3-year, 5-year window. We've probably seen more turbulence in this window as any, right? With economic, with social, right? With all these things, like no one could predict the pandemic. No one could predict how fast digital transformation, the journey to the cloud moved, right? You look at the cyber threat landscape, you look at what's going on with a macro trend and some of the political pressures, as well as inflation, right? There's been like this massive wave of things. So, Mike Tyson always said that you always have a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? And it takes that discipline of making sure that regardless of whatever the factors are, that you're able to still evolve and meet the moment. But that window there of what kind of the backdrop of things were, it takes a lot of dedication and focus to power through certain things, because it's very quick to pull the ripcord and say we need to go back to the basics because things are changing, right? So it really has been interesting. And I think when we look at data, right, we look at how customers, businesses think of data, their view has largely changed over the last 5 years, not just the people who are setting out to say we're going to try and protect it.
Yeah, it's funny, the analogy I would say is like, just starting a startup is a challenge into itself. It's basically saying like, can you run, I'm the worst because I'm Canadian, so I don't know miles, or I know kilometers, but anyway, so let's say a 5-minute mile, whatever a really fast mile is. Let's just, whatever that number is these days, right? Can you run an 8-second 100-meter, right? Like that's this like fundamental goal. And like, that's a startup. Like you're doing a near impossible task, but then say, okay, now I need you to do it on the set of Ninja Warrior. Like that's what you did for the last 3 years. Like, it's crazy.
No, it is. And that's, you're right. Like there's just so many things that come into it, and everything from responsible spending to the strategic visions and all of those things, right? Nothing happens in a vacuum, and we're all some of our parts, but you're 100% right in terms of the innovation that's been poured into the product and things like that. It all has to work with everything else. Everything has to align. Everything, and when you do it, it has to be done at a scale that can last, right? It sounds easy, right? It sounds like if we draw it up on paper, everything should go smooth. It's extremely challenging. You learn that along the way. Folks much smarter than I have figured that out way ahead of time. But it really is. It really, there's a lot of things to consider. And I think that the beauty of at least the situation that we were in was the fact that Commvault had this really strong vision around where we wanted to go, and really had aligned ourselves internally to make sure it succeeds. And anyone who's looking at it and saying, how do I kind of translate and disrupt? It really comes with that vision, that strategy, and making sure that, the goal was always to produce something that customers needed, that businesses had the need for, right? And really just this maniacal focus on it. And that was the core piece that I think made everything work. Everything else pulled into that. But, at the end of the day, it was always trying to evolve ourselves to make sure that we could be the best we could for our customers.
Yeah, I think the phrase that I forget where the origin of it was. It might have been, God, I can't remember, but at any rate, it's the idea of being ruthlessly pragmatic. That
Mm-hmm.
you have to have like this, like you said, maniacal focus, this
Yep.
aggressive need to achieve a particular thing like this. That has to be occur. That's the vision,
Yes.
that thing, that method. We do that. We learn and listen along the way, but we have to stay on that pathway to that thing. And
Yes.
then that ruthless pragmatism gets you to the thing of like, we're going to solve this problem. And SaaS is necessary. So the problem that today that you solve, and ultimately the future of the many problems that you can solve because you solved the method first,
Yes.
it has to be done in SaaS. There's no way that we can have the compute capability locally. Like, so if we are always going to run on premises and we're going to do that thing, what you're going to have is you're going to be limited by the capacity and capability of what you can do locally. Now, not to say that edge and local and the increase
Mm-hmm.
in compute, like all sorts of neat things have occurred to, you know, pretty fundamentally increase what we can do in the data center, even at the
Yes.
edge, even in very odd little remote sites, you can do neat stuff. But in the end, the level and like the depth of defense, the depth of understanding of doing heuristic, behavioral understanding of data movements,
Yeah.
network traffic movements, the patterns of usage from like combining network and data has to happen in SaaS. That's the only
Yes.
place it can happen. So then I'm going to ask the tough question. How did we convince people that the most critical thing for them to do is to protect all their data from the rest of the world, but I need you to connect it to a system that's in the internet?
Yeah, no, security is a concern. The one thing that I'll say is just speaking with a business the other day, it isn't a one-way street. You mentioned it, right? The data center is the data center, SaaS is SaaS, right? When you think about there's pressures for everything, right? I'm adopting Office 365. I'm moving to the cloud. I want to protect those workloads potentially in the cloud. Well, I have this database that's core to my business. I want to still be able to have complete control of that within my environment because for whatever reason, requirements or otherwise, right? I've decided that I don't want to have that there. Oh, by the way, we have this robo office or this M&A that just went on, and they're doing things a different way right now. So you have this highly scalable framework that you say, okay, I need to protect data in areas that make the most sense to me. Data has gravity, I understand that, but at the same point in time, right, if I have a strategic vision or some circumstance that dictates where I need to protect my data, you see a lot of push and pull. So a lot of folks say, hey, I'm going to the cloud. Let's protect my data in the cloud. You have other folks saying, which hasn't been as publicized, I'm repatriating, I'm bringing things back in house. So
Yeah.
this evolution of hybrid cloud, it's a journey, right? There isn't any destination to it. It's the same with data protection, right? Sometimes folks are saying, hey, I'd like to be able to protect my data this way, and for these other workloads, I want to protect it that way. To get to your question about security, you need to be able to deliver, regardless of both environments, the same level of controls. Things work differently. We understand that. Immutability looks differently in the cloud as opposed to it does when you're managing it in your own environment. But you need to deliver that capability to be able to say core tenets of things being tamper-proof, rapidly recoverable, right? Being able to have the compliance controls I need. They're static, right? That's something that can't necessarily fall off whether you're changing the form factor. So the form factor could be anything, but it's a
Right.
matter of when you're deciding that you want to go to SaaS, when you're deciding that you want to go into the cloud, it can't be a sacrifice of those core capabilities that you need. And when it comes to security, right, making sure that as it leaves my perimeter, quote unquote, right, you're able to translate those security controls just as you would in terms of how I keep my data safe, how I make sure folks can't tamper with it, how I make sure it's recoverable. Those things are still delivered in the SaaS form.
And I think it becomes this interesting challenge of, especially in a data management and data compliance, which is really kind of the
Yes.
core, like it's business compliance, not just data
Yep.
compliance. Like, how do I make sure that I can recover my
Yep.
systems and I can protect my customers' access to their money, whatever property,
Yes.
all these things that we manage. I need them to be able to access their systems within a certain period of time, and it's a regulatory requirement to do so. But then the fun part is then the regulations often are a limit to innovation, because that's what happened with the public cloud, where like we had, SOX came along, and then all of a sudden people were like, whoa, I need to, your CISO, which was a brand new role, and all of the executive team, so everybody in the C-suite had to sign that they are personally liable for maintaining compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley. But it was a fairly loose set of things. And I worked in financial services.
Sure.
Oh boy, I learned a way more about Sarbanes-Oxley than any human should know who wasn't a lawyer. But then we adapted. And then it became this idea of, data in the cloud. And I worked in a Canadian financial services organization. So it was all about, not only did you have to keep your data in Canada, but we had to keep some of it in the province. And I think in the States it's the same thing. Like there's like, you can't take, say, I'll call it, I'm going to use a name just because everybody will maybe be familiar with it, but not we're saying it, not a customer story necessarily, but Blue Cross Blue Shield is a well-known brand, but they're Blue Cross Blue Shield each state. Like, so there is the parent organization, but there ultimately is individual things because they have to manage policies, local regulations, local everything. So we were sort of stuck with that. And then we had the Patriot Act came in. So as Canadians, there was this super fear that we can't have our data be subject to, other countries' compliance requirements that we were not legally allowed to meet. And then in the end, we said, so we can't move to the cloud because there was no cloud in Canada. And then the funny thing was we said, well, all is strictness to the regulations. We can't let our data reside on U.S. soil because it's subject to all these other regulatory, boundaries that are beyond us. And then in the end, it was like, hey, where's our financial system held? Like our like data record was in a system that was based in Canada, but their disaster recovery center was in New Jersey.
Yeah.
You're like, wait a second. So our entire customer database is in the United States already. They're like, oh, okay, we can use the cloud. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, how can we best utilize the cloud?
Sure.
And so I think that's where we are with this idea of like SaaS was scary because like, I don't know if I trust the data that's in the cloud. Well, it's not your data, it's metadata. And then Edward Snowden taught us that metadata can be pretty meaningful. So we had to we had to dance around that one for a while.
Sure.
And I think organizations have pretty broadly said, even though we're saying we want to keep data local, we understand that certain functions are going to require us to embrace SaaS. And that's why, the method was important, that you're able to use localized data management, but cloud-based computational and heuristic analysis that keeps that sort of air-gapped capability.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And you look at from a requirement standpoint, customers and businesses have a ton of different unique standards that they have to meet. Do I have data retention requirements based upon where I am or the industry that I operate in, right? Do I have specific sovereignty requirements in terms of where that data is held, right? Are there other things that I need to consider when it comes to whether it be an internal or an external regulation that I need to adhere to, right? And you think of things like HIPAA and so on and so forth, right? Yeah. When it comes to really conversations that we've had with businesses and the thing that we've seen is that, for instance, data sovereignty is something that's critical, right? Where is my data held? Where is it replicated? But how do I make sure it's still resilient with staying within that in that environment? And cloud providers, infrastructure providers, right? They've been very good in terms of building this infrastructure that's flexible in the cloud, which allows us to do certain things that we need to do with our product. But at the same point in time, right, something that Commvault has realized is that it's not always a one-to-one, right? So can we still be able to marry something like using the cloud and having all the benefits of the cloud, but also sending copies on-prem if I need it for rapid recoverability? So there's been this evolution not only of using the cloud, but how both elements maybe can play off each other while not sacrificing residency requirements. So a lot of what happens in the cloud is often dictated based upon where I am, what industry I am in, and internal things that we've kind of mandated. And that's kind of the beauty of seeing how things have progressed in the cloud, because these use cases, these demands, as you mentioned, with certain customers of having these stringent requirements, have really forced infrastructure to evolve. And in doing so, right, it's this really secure thing in the cloud that has only benefited over being able to need to meet these requirements based upon really a broad span of businesses.
The great thing is that we've got a lot of operational intelligence that we've gotten over time, and we've evolved business continuity and disaster recovery. Thinking of, initially it was like we'd have a second data center and it had to be a certain distance away for, like, I ran the business continuity program at one organization for the distributed systems. And it was wild, like doing like all of the like matrix of like, this needs to be a tier 1 system. Well, that tier 1 system uses 4 other systems that are in tier 3. So it's not a tier 1 system. And that understanding that a single application is not recoverable without its adjacent dependencies. And this is where then data protection and data management and application protection became so important to understand, like, oh, wow, we're just like firing it all onto one big old tape and sending it off site to, Iron Mountain, which is like, that's fantastic. But how do we recover that system? Like, well, we need to recover 6 systems because there's all this interdependency. And so getting like state management included in the data protection, getting data access patterns understood, because what we believe the system does, well, all of a sudden there's this other development team over there and they've built this neat API boundary to the core application that's sitting in the mainframe. So there's 7 applications that are using this API gateway they've created. So we think that we're protecting the 7 systems and we think that we're protecting the mainframe, but who's protecting the API gateway? Like, so having patterns of utilization and traffic management, traffic understanding included in how you map out data protection is this next fantastic field of fresh powder that we get to explore.
And you look at the amount of unstructured data that's out there today, right? You look at, so when I have databases, when I have systems, right, it's a little bit more hierarchical and it's a little bit easier to determine, right? It's kind of unwieldy when I look at these things that are unstructured, right? What's it digging into? What's it supporting? So I think you're right that it's another inflection point in terms of saying, okay, as I move to the cloud, as I leverage certain things, right, as my IT stack changes, how does that dictate or change how I protect or where I protect that data? That's kind of been a really the crux of the industry in terms of saying it's evolving at a very fluid rate. How do I make sure that businesses are able to protect data where it is in these mission critical areas today and tomorrow? And you have certain things like unstructured data, you have certain things like containers, you have certain things that are coming into the fray now that need equal protection, but it's being used and leveraged in a way that maybe if we thought of 10 years ago, it's not the same, right?
The other piece is the cost of movement. And as somebody who knows a lot of drummers, I'm a musician, so I learned this idea of efficiency of movement is the most important thing. First, you learn how to bang the drums. You learn rhythm, and you learn how to do things within that rhythm. But then from there, the real mastery of the art is efficiency of movement. It's same with guitar, same with a lot of things. So there's a lot of physical things we can think of, like true, like efficiency of movement. And then we get into like data protection, data management, data lifecycle. It's all great that we can say, oh yeah, I can ship it to 7 different clouds and I can do all this and I can back it up 27 times a day. I can take snapshots, all these immutable copies flying all over the place. Like there's a literal cost to the movement, and there's also a technological impact of spinning it up and putting it in all these places. And it made us rethink on the architecture and design of data management and data protection. which is neat. So I'd love to. What are you seeing as far as how people are learning, most likely the hard way? What is the cost of those design patterns when it comes to data management?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? And the footprint is growing. So we all know that, right? When you take a look at what I have to protect, it's more today than it was tomorrow. When you look at things like the cloud, right, you're looking at ingress, egress fees. You're looking at things that maybe are a little bit different from what I had, right? I have storage expenses when I manage it myself. I'm looking at potential fees when it comes to how data is moved. So there's strategic decisions around what I need to, as every business looks, right? What do I need to maintain myself? What can I offload to the cloud? Can I use something like cloud storage? Can I use something as a secondary storage target that maybe is a little bit different in terms of leveraging the cloud in that aspect? So I think when you take a look at this, the broad spectrum, customers are really needing to be very strategic in saying, what is mission critical to me? That's what I need to protect first, right? And then where do I store that data in terms of maximizing my cost? What tier do I store that data in if I'm leveraging things like the cloud? Hot tiers, with ready access are more expensive than your cooler tiers. Am I able to archive data?
Yeah.
I know that we've gone at great lengths to make sure that if data is in the cloud, right, a lot of those fees to move the data is handled within Metallic. But a lot of businesses really need to take a look at it and say, okay, it's not just as simple as press go to the cloud, right? Once I'm in the cloud, do I have a solution provider that is going to allow me to move this data and not get dinged? If I'm going to use my own, cloud storage buckets or things like that, then I need to take into consideration the cost that's associated with that. So it's largely around access to that data, how frequently I'm going to move that data, and then really where that data is going that customers need to take a look at and say, okay, as my business end to end, what makes sense for this model.
Yeah, that's the fun part of that pattern. Like, I mean, the cloud providers have gotten more, nice about the idea that like it's not as punitive to move data out, because I think we've generally accepted that multi-cloud is a thing. Like I used to joke, I said I'm gonna get a bumper sticker that says my other cloud is a hybrid cloud. Like,
Yeah.
find me a cloud first organization and I'll find you a company that has 7 VMware data centers that they're just not talking about.
Yeah.
Like, so, and the same thing comes with cloud, right? When Andy Jassy got on stage like 6 years ago and said multi-cloud in an AWS keynote, and you're like, wait, literally last year we weren't allowed to say that word. Like I was a speaker, we were told we were not allowed to use the word multi-cloud because they had to, it was very sort of messaging focused that we want to provide you all the services you need. And I totally get that. But then, multi-cloud, I mean, I always say multi-cloud is not strategic. It's just what you're stuck with. You acquire a company, you got M&A, and all of a sudden like, hey, we only run in AWS.
Sure.
Well, as of Monday, we suddenly have an Azure presence because we were about to buy a company.
Yeah. No, you can hedge your bets on where you want to put a little bit more focus if that's your prerogative, right? But multi-cloud is a scenario where it's very much a fact of life. You mentioned M&A, right? I could make every effort to standardize on one. It just isn't going to happen, right? And when we take a look at how infrastructure and products are being leveraged, how applications are being built, when it comes to the cloud, right, it really is amoebic in terms of how these things all live together. And what we've seen with businesses taking a look is that, yeah, they may have one cloud that they leverage a little bit more than others, but it isn't really a scenario where it's only one, right? It's not mutually exclusive. So I think you're 100% right. There will be something at some point. If you're in that lucky bucket where you say, "Hey, we only run one," there probably will be something that disrupts that in the near future. But yes, you can make every effort you want to use one more than others. But I think that the cloud infrastructure, in terms of a lot of these hyperscalers, will persist at a lot of companies. So
Yeah, and that's what I'm pretty happy that the industry is like as competitive as our world is, and look, we know the truth is like we compete against other providers, but in the end, it's not like it was when in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, where it was like you have one storage provider, you have
yes.
one cloud, one, hardware provider.
Hmm.
And when you switch from one hardware provider, you had to get rid of all the first one to get the
Sure.
second one. And it was these gnarly transitions. Now it's like I walk into a data center and I see all the different plates in the front of all the storage products, and everybody's using multiple clouds, so they use a service that ultimately uses a different cloud on the back end.
Yes.
And that's why having the right abstraction to be able to handle all of where that data lives.
Yeah.
And then now that those providers are going to get more comfortable, like, hey, we want to have the majority of data here.
Hmm.
So they're going to be a little bit more friendly. Like, we get that we got to send some data out. So we're probably going to do pricing protection for organization, for enterprises. Like, we
Sure.
want to keep your data as much as we can, but we know you're sending it to that other cloud for that other thing. So
Sure.
we'll give you an egress deal if you promise to grow your footprint in other ways. So I think they're becoming more flexible,
Yes.
but as an organization for you, like as a technology for you, it's like super exciting because like you are solving the abstracted problem and you solve that problem well, and then whatever the thing is underneath it becomes like, hey, it's got more capabilities, or it looks a little different in how it does
Yeah.
certain raw functions, but in the end, like, I can present a common way to do a thing that's a
Yes.
business outcome thing, that's a technology thing, and then like you whatever the underlay is, so be it.
Yeah, and we've understood, right? Like when we look at the data center evolution, when we look at the cloud evolution, we understand that it's as much where data lives today as it's where it's going tomorrow, right? And workload coverage matters. So when you take a look at how a business wants to run their operations, it needs to be able to flex with them. So it's not necessarily just static and saying like, hey, here's my environment today, as you mentioned, right? Because you have influences like the cloud and specific clouds that you're looking to potentially use more than others, or applications that are core to you and how you're evolving those. So I think coverage matters, because when you really take a look at how I want to protect my data, what businesses are saying is that I don't want to have to upset my strategy because I have data in quote unquote SAP HANA today, and tomorrow I'm acquiring someone who's all in on Oracle, right? You need to have standardized SLAs, you need to have standardized governance, you need to have standardized compliance and recoverability. So from the insulation standpoint that a business needs, whether I'm talking about cloud or something in my environment, right? I don't want to have to refactor a strategy based upon how my business and my IT stack evolves. But at the same point in time, right, I need to be able to have some core principles that we adhere to, right? And kind of our mainstays. So it's this interesting evolution that we've seen that our businesses are going under. But at the same point in time, it really shines at the fact that from a workload standpoint, a niche by niche approach probably isn't the most scalable, right? So that coverage across is really what businesses have looked for, because they don't want to have to upset strategies to factor in a different way to protect it, right? So it's like, hey, I need the flexibility to move. I know I'm going to keep moving. Every time I do have a move, I don't need to necessarily start from ground zero with a data protection strategy. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting evolution we're seeing. We're fortunate enough to be able to help customers along in that journey, but no two scenarios from a business standpoint are the same. And what today looks like versus what tomorrow and the future looks like could look vastly different based upon how things are being pulled together at a specific business.
But like I said, that's why I cheer on what you and the team are doing, like as a platform and as an approach. Like I'm a firm believer that it's like approach is first, methodology is within that. The IP in the is part of that method, and the fact that you're able to build on this foundation, which has been tested, tried and
Yeah.
tested for at this point like practically decades, right? It's been around for a while. We know that stuff works. And then to take that and then based on that method to like etch a sketch the whole plan and say, okay, if we had to start from scratch, how would we do it? But we've got the IP to leverage. So you went to first principles thinking
Yep.
based on being able to leverage a fundamental proven set of IP. It literally is like the best combination of things. Not easy, good. Like I say it like,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it totally makes sense. Like, no. This is is wrought with potential for failure.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And we mentioned security, right? Like there's a lot of things that go into building a platform, right? And Commvault has fantastic IP as we translate to SaaS, right? Like trust is a big thing in terms of being able to deliver this capability. Zero trust architecture, hardened from the ground up, right? There's a lot of things that are built in because it's a 25-year plus company that we do at our core, right? It's in our DNA. Then you look at the workload coverage that Commvault protects today, being able to pull it over to the cloud, and you have this like interesting matrimony between the best of cloud, but this best of kind of fundamental principles that live within Commvault that we're able to pull over that deliver it in a SaaS manner that you say, hey, this is light touch, this is cloud oriented, this is what I need, but I'm not going to have to sacrifice things in terms of coverage or in terms of security, right? Being able to translate what is great about Commvault and deliver in a new form factor is exactly kind of the mission, but there are core principles that we have ingrained that have allowed us to accelerate in those capacities. And that's largely where we are today in terms of being able to leverage what we have on the truck, leverage what Commvault's been good at, but really take away a lot of those barriers and challenges because it's been trusted and proven and all of those things that have helped us get here, 25 years in.
Yeah, and this idea that it's like you don't have to come up with the data protection solution as like the core, like to have gone to begin again with, recreating that would have like, that's why people are sort of generally like single cloud, protection or like trying to only solve one particular technology. It's much easier to be able to adapt an existing system and a method that's proven and then augment that with a new technology. And like I said, now to bring that SaaS, and because now you've got all that data, that intelligence, that understanding of all this history of behavior.
Yep.
And now we bring machine learning and potential there. I can tell you there's going to be a lot of field days and a lot of new announcements in the next couple of years, because what you're likely already well into roadmap with, the potential is incredible, and it's pretty cool. I'm excited as a technologist. Like the nerd parts of me are excited, but in the end, it's only as good as being able to make it business critical.
Yep.
And that's, sadly, the greatest tech in the world is not sellable necessarily. So it's when you got the pairing, you're like, all right, I'm long team Commvault.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like the core principles, flexibility, comprehensiveness, right? The ability to be able to whatever that data loss, if it's the threat vector, whatever it is, right? Being able to also provide that recoverability that you need, like no matter where the product goes. And I think you'll see that in terms of what's being delivered, right? And innovations that are coming. The one thing that can't be sacrificed are those things. And that's what is a bedrock in Commvault. It's what businesses have really shown a preference for in terms of saying, this is how I want to protect my data. And the innovation that will deliver and continue to deliver obviously needs to strike those chords. I think a very interesting, take a look at the industry, right? A very interesting thing that's going on with the industry is this convergence between IT and security, right? As you take a look and see how both are having to come together. Data protection largely is that core fundamental pillar. There's other elements as well, but a core fundamental pillar that is really causing the fusion between these two departments and a convergence. And the goal has to be to make sure that we make both lives easier, right? And make sure that we don't sacrifice in light of that.
Yeah, I remember there was when we sort of came up with the term DevSecOps, and there was a bit of an allergy to the phrase because people are like, why do we have to say it? Like it should be intrinsic to DevOps. I'm like, but it's not. You see, that's the reason. That's why we have to call it DevSecOps, because you forgot the sec part. Like I get that it was supposed to be baked in there, but hey, I was supposed to take out the garbage this morning and I forgot. So that's why my apartment smells. Like this is why we had to explicitly say DevSecOps. Like, don't forget those folks over there that you get irked at because they keep stopping you from deploying stuff to prod because you got to run a bunch of penetration tests and all those things. Like, yeah, they need to be at the table, and they need to be at the design phase, and they need to be at the pre-deployment phase, and they need to be in the post-deployment phase. It should be intrinsic, but it's not. And that's why having security baked into operational data management, like that's, it has to be put into the life cycle, and to be able to have like the right abstraction to present them the capability to do those things
Yes.
and have access to the where the data is, wherever it is. This is, why that foundation needs to be solid, and then from there you can build good SEC practices. But in the end,
Yes.
you got to build them. You got to call those folks up.
Yeah. No, it's a handshake, right? And that's the thing. It starts at strategy, right? You mentioned a lot of things there, right? Am I properly planning? Are we articulating the business risk upwards, right? Do we have the proper handoffs of where our roles come together and who's responsible for what? And it manifests itself in obviously not only procedures, but solutions you use, right? And so on and so forth. A perfect example is, for good reason, right? Ransomware, cyber threats are a key focal point around keeping data protected, secure, recoverable. What does the plan look like? Have we built the plan? Have we articulated the plan? Have we tested the plan? Right? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. So you're 100% right with that analogy, and it's the convergence of a mature organization has it done really well. Unfortunately, it's a newer practice, right? So folks are
Yeah.
still kind of getting up to speed, but it's critical in how we focus on protecting data. It's critical in how businesses focus on continuity and disaster recovery.
Yeah, in the end, unfortunately, we also get wrapped into the where we see the tech market and the product marketing side of it is like we come up with a pure marketing play, which is like, hey, what's sort of the hot keyword that is going to get us some activity,
Sure.
right? And of course, ransomware was the new hotness
Sure.
for the last while, but in the end, I always think of it as the same thing. It's like, that's why it goes to foundation. I hate to feel like I'm just like hammering
Sure.
this drum too much or beating this horse, but my last company, we started off, we were software defined control. Then it was hybrid cloud management. Then it was hybrid cloud control, because we were trying to find like, what's the phrasing that's resonating with people at the time based on the movements that are like macro level movements and operational movements that are happening in the industry. And then eventually became like application resource management. Did the product change? No. Did the foundation of it change? No. Did the way that we marketed it change? Yes. Because new features came around, there was new ways in which we could find but it's like, had to have the right abstraction, the right foundation, the right IP, and then like, what's a new way we can use that to solve a problem that may be new? And that's like, so I'm glad that you haven't said like, yeah, we're the ransomware superpower or whatever. Like we have to, like, I know we got to do that thing because
Sure.
you got to get found on
It's not,
Google.
you have to. That's what businesses, right? Like it's a problem, but you're 100% right. Ransomware and cyber is a real challenge, right? But so is insider threats. So
Yeah.
are, unfortunately, things like natural disasters, human error, data corruption, right? There's one thing that may be a prominent focus because of the times, but that doesn't mean that all of those other risks you just put off to the side. If I lose my data because of anything, right, it's an adverse impact to my business. If I can't run my operations, if sensitive data is leaked or destroyed, right? These specific challenges, whether it's at the hands of someone who's malicious or not malicious, are real challenges for businesses. So while we need to specifically, to ransomware's point, right, build controls, build practices, be able to keep businesses ahead when it comes to how they safeguard data, how they recover from that threat, it doesn't mean all those other ones go off to the side and they're no longer applicable, right? How do I
Yeah.
stay recoverable and compliant during all of them is the key. The fact that ransomware is evolving at, unfortunately, a really rapid rate, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a concern. It's something that needs to be tackled head on, but it doesn't mean you just offshore everything else and say these are no longer threats, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the old thing goes, right? We have to be right all the time. They only have to be right once.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to face. And as a security professional, as a data professional, like it's a rough thing to think about on a daily basis, and but as the landscape changes, we adapt. Like I said, use the right method, and we'll see the technology's there to do fantastic things. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see what's ahead now, because I did say I want to go down this tangent before we go. I know we're actually at time, but I'm going to go a little over because I got to
Sure.
ask, what was your path down the chemistry world here? Because that was, as a tech product marketer myself,
Sure.
I've done a lot of different things. I'd love to hear what was drawing you to that, and what drew you back.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic detour in the career. I worked for one of the largest chemical companies no one's ever heard of in a very specific portfolio that was around used for tires, it was used for food, it was used for, across the board. The interesting thing about chemical, and the thing that I think I absolutely loved, was the fact of seeing innovation that really impacts folks' lives at a very material level.
Yeah.
Things like plastics, things like metals, right? Things like fibers, you really have no concept until you're in that world of how all of these things come together and manifest itself in a product, a solution, or whatever um, for consumer. And the beauty is you see all the things behind the scenes, the manufacturing plants, all of that stuff. You also see the molecular level where it's like, hey, we're talking about innovation of fusing two molecules together, so on and so forth. And it's fascinating. Ultimately, made the decision to go back to tech because that's where my heart lies. But one of my best choices was to enter the chemical field because it gives you a different perspective on really what it means to innovate and really what it means to deliver things that matter. So it was a very good experience for myself, at least.
When I'd say, like we talked about at the start, is like you get people who we learn the human interaction, and ultimately that is like, what is the thing that we're doing? What's the outcome that we're generating? Like, we use amazing technologies, but ultimately, what is the outcome that we're generating? And what is the thing that, this is why the core of how messaging works, and positioning is the idea of that you have a problem, and as a result of that problem, there's a risk to your business, which is X, right? So there's a meaningful material risk. And we have a solution that is able to solve this problem, to meet your required capabilities in a differentiated way that allows to separate from competitive offerings,
Sure.
so that you can do Y. And that is the thing. It's all the stuff up to the so that you can do, super cool.
Yeah.
I love to nerd out about it, but in the end, it's the so that you can do part that matters, because that is like the fact that I could be a cloud provider for Cochlear, amazing. Love that I'm doing like multi-cloud stuff.
Sure.
The fact that I can see a video of a little girl hearing her mother's voice for the first time
Sure.
and watch the impact of that, you're like, I'm out. I like, none of the shit I do
Mic
matters.
drop.
Like, this is it. I'm like, but then I think I used to tell people that, I'm like, that's what we do. Like, we're a part of that.
Yeah.
To understand that you as a technologist can impact that outcome, that makes me pretty damn proud about what I do on a daily basis. And like you said, to go to that level, like at a molecular level, to see how stuff happens, and to know that you have the ability to be a part of that.
Yeah.
It's a bigness that's difficult to comprehend for most people. They kind of like, they probably don't want it. Me, I'm like,
Well,
I kind of dig in hard on it.
yeah. No, I'll give you a perfect example, right? Next time you hop on a flight, you get in the plane, right? You take off, you land. Think about it. Think about what's going on in the plane, right? Everything from the luggage racks up top to the cart that's being pushed, right? Everything that was designed in that plane is to deliver the experience. Now, underneath that is the materials that do it. Is it durable? Is it lightweight, right? And on the back end of that is a raw material. The back end of that is so it's almost like this downfall waterfall where you take a look at it and you say, this is what we're on. This is what we've done, right? And you start decomposing all of the things. Why do we use this plastic? Why do we use this metal? Why do we use this, right? Similar to technology, right? I'm using
Right.
X, Y, Z. Now we start to back in and say, okay, what is it? All the way down to lines of code, right? So there are common parallels, and it's just interesting to see because you translate obviously things from technology, things from chemical, you pull them together and you say, okay, they're not totally different, but you're dealing with obviously different outputs. And it really is fascinating. You can go on for days, but to see things happen and manifest themselves in front of you. You're like, wow, this is crazy because this looks like nothing. This piece of plastic looks like nothing. Ultimately, it delivers this that impacts us daily, right? And that's the same thing with tech. A lot of things that go on behind the scenes and the output look drastically different, but they have a meaningful purpose, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, like the fact that the people forget to go down to the molecular level. Like, remember that these are companies that are literally doing R&D that is like like Teflon was created where it didn't exist. Graphene is now a thing that exists that's now being used in literal like fabric of clothing.
Yes.
But which is like an fundamental shift in how we can recapture carbon and use it. Like this is huge 0 to 1, like more like 0 to 100 innovations that are going on that take a decade of ideating and chemical production to understand how it is and testing and all this stuff. Meanwhile, on the software side, I feel kind of lazy. I'm like, I could get an idea. I could go from here. We finish this call. I'm going to go on Amazon or Google and I'm going to spin up a product. I can have it on Product Hunt by tomorrow morning. Sure. I can go on LegalZoom. I can incorporate. I can do all this stuff instantly. And that's seen as like huge innovation. But then it's like, but how did you get to be able to do that?
Sure.
And it's like, it is pretty wild to stop and think of just how huge that tiny thing is. I mean, it's probably why people do a lot of psychedelics.
Yeah, no, I get it, right? A next level of thinking.
Yeah. Sometimes people don't want to think of how that little joint that's making the flap move on the plane. They're like, how many times has that done this?
Yeah, you're 100% right? But you better trust it to work, right? And it comes down to the mechanics of it, right? But it also comes down to what it is. And you're right. It's the same thing across software, right? Hey, I'm using this for X, Y, and Z, and I might not want to think about it, that the fact that there's a human that created it because it's really big for us, right? But at the same point in time, to back into it, you start to realize the sum of all its parts. So
and that's again one thing that the advantage that you've got as a platform is that the economy of knowledge scale allows you to innovate so much differently than how we used to in straight local install products where we couldn't gather centralized intelligence of patterns. Now that you can aggregate the right safe understanding of heuristic behaviors across a broad set of customers, and then really truly have combined understanding of that. So you're not thinking of like localized, like, so I could say this particular data center operates in this way, but is that the average? Is that the norm? Is that a mean? Is that a, like, to now say I can measure 1,000 data centers and 4 cloud providers and different regions, and you can really do that stuff that can guide so much that feed. That's molecular level innovation that's possible. It's pretty exciting.
Pretty exciting. That's right. So no, it's right. And you mentioned AI. It's got a ton of applications. The molecular level of that is that the data is anonymized, that the bias has been stripped out, that it's used ethically, right? So we're doing it at scale, we're doing that practice, whether we realize it or not. But it's fundamental. That's your point. So
and thank goodness for the fact that we can properly train these things. Like, because before, if you had machine learning that you train in a local thing, it's like if I fed it nothing but Mary had a little lamb, all it's going to come up with is Mary had a little cow. Like, it can only deviate so much. So having a large set of aggregate training data allows us to do the right experimentation, to do the right planning, testing, and ultimately then when we do deliver a feature or capability, we've been able to test it offline in such a really, like, the same way you go to IKEA and it's got that little thing where you see, like, it's like pressing on the chair to show you that this chair's been tested 200,000 times, like every minute. And you're like, that's what machine learning is doing for us. That's what AI is doing for us. It's happening without us knowing that it's going on, so that when we see the feature come, it's like, oh yeah, no, this feature's been in development for a long time.
We can explain it.
Yeah. explanation, and we could go on for hours. This has been
Yeah.
awesome. Hey, Zach, thank you very much.
Thank you
So
for having me.
for folks that want to reach you, I'll have, of course, links to Metallic and stuff. So but you're a fantastic and interesting human. So how would people find you out on the interwebs?
Sure, sure. So you can always reach me at my email, zbrigman at commvault.com. Check out my LinkedIn, Zack Brigman. Anyone who wants to connect, happy to connect. And I know you'll have the links out there, metallic.io for folks who are interested, or commvault.com for folks who are interested in our data protection stuff. But yeah, happy to connect and continue the conversation.
And yeah, I'm gonna go and put on my graphene T-shirt, and I'm gonna then. The funny thing is, said I love automation, I love technology, but then you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna pour water over hand ground coffee into an AeroPress because I'm a weird coffee nerd, and the reason I like to do that is because I love to do it, and that I've done all this other automation so it frees up the time so I can make my weird coffee.
I love it. I love it. Go forth and prosper.
That's it. Zach, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.